Something fun I like to do every year or so is try to find a bunch of disturbing albums to explore. It was during that binge in 2020 when I gave the, famous Current 93 album I Have a Special Plan for This World. If you haven't heard the album, here's a snippet.
In her eyes tonight, there's a glow tonight. They're so bright they could light Fontainebleau tonight.
When everyone you have ever loved is finally gone. When everything you have ever wanted is finally done with. And are held forever where there is no time. You can do nothing you are not told to do. The very words you speak are only its very words.
It's essentially a psychotic album, not as an insult, more in medical psychosis. It feels like a hallucination, the strange foreboding drone throughout as the narrator spoke of the ties that brought pain to life and the morbid realizations of its nature. The writing was wicked and dark, the implications were morbid, even a bit cosmic. Naturally, I liked it and put it aside. Because of the name, I thought Current 93 was just a late 90s electronic act, and thought there wasn't much else to them. And I guess that because of bias, since Boards of Canada's Garde was the other disturbing album that was extremely creepy. Except, in the years after, I gave Dog's Blood Rising and The Light Is Leaving Us All their own respective shots. Later, If You Set a City Upon a Hill, which no one told me about, in 2022. Rude. This year, right at the start, I subjected myself to a bunch of Current 93, their major releases and such, and I am impressed. It's hard to compress all 40 years, yes, that long, of Current 93.
The asphalt is glistening. Forlan, falsifier, telescope, view topsy-turvy. If a city...
However, it's not like The Light Is Leaving Us All isn't representative of most of Current 93, nor that it represents all their writings and compositions. I did not listen to every single album because they have too many albums. I listened to almost 30 of them. There are about 4-ish phases to the band, and by phases I mean the same sound but with different colors of glitter. The first phase is the 80s no-wave phase, which lasted not that long. The second phase is the folk and acoustic phase through most of the 90s, up until 2000, wherein Current 93 briefly had their electric experimental phase. And finally, their modern symphonic compositional phase, starting at How He Loved the Moon. I hope you remember that because I lied to you. They don't have any phases. Get fucked. After listening to a lot, but not all, of their discography, if you ever reach one of those moments where you can't find music or are bored of what you have, listen to Current 93. Even if you listen to music like this within this genre, you should still listen to Current 93. Not all 30 of their albums because you're not immortal. Maybe 1 or 2 albums. There is no musical act at all, in my opinion, anything like Current 93. There's certainly tons of artists who share that genre of acoustic and avant-garde, and there's certainly many dark experimental noise artists like them, but not one of them share that strange angle of trouble and horror, the perspective of religion and the human experience. The best way I can describe Current 93 is horror at the face of a world from a highly troubled and traumatized perspective. I don't know anything about David Michael, the lead frontman and writer. Apparently he was born in Malaysia, and although I don't know to what degree because I didn't look into it, I'm not a stalker, it reminded me of when I read about George Orwell as a soldier in Southeast Asia during Britain's occupation. While Orwell was a soldier, I think he was probably born there not as a soldier, just a thought. I'm not saying the two are connected at all, I'm saying that's the connection I drew from it. Plus, perhaps the boy saw some shit. From the lyrics though, I'm guessing that he is a deeply religious person, but not an evangelical. Given some of the songs on Christ and the Pale Queens, Mighty in Sorrow, and Imperium, and that's why commas are very important. The song, How the Satanic Glory Faded, off 666666, okay, has Tibet talking to some sort of pastor about an evil looming while he nods on and agrees.
Because right now, and I thank you for your time right now, Mr. Tibbet, because I know it's your bill here, but I'm telling you, and you can pinpoint me on this.
With the song being about all of this shit.
Shining black beetle wing, polished is he. Deep-shaped tortoise shell.
God comes down to the narrator and provides them a vision of Satan, Lucifer. On a side note, I do like how the song implies that Lucifer takes the form of both genders to tempt humanity, both as a temptress and tempter to Adam and Eve. How they take the form of both male and female, how gazing in both of their beautiful eyes comes back with only lies because they only exist to lure you in, because ultimately, in Chrissy lore, Satan is a tempter of man and nothing more.
Gold-plated illusion and fool's gold in heaven.
The album came out in 2005, if you care. I doubt they're trying to claim Satan is non-binary, because, that's weird, right? I think it's more that Satan is an angelical figure, in a biblical sense, not necessarily a human being, that it tempts humans more as a force, not with bias and implication, but as a demonic force which cares little for human customs and cultures. Yeah! On the same album, there's Tamlin, based off the Scottish folktale of the transition of fall into winter. Though the angle of Bonnie Janet having to save cute elf named Tamlin because he is the father to her child,
He's the father of her child.
I guess. I think it's more on the angle of genuine romance, and it reminds me of Big Thief Sparrow and its interpretation of Adam and Eve eating the forbidden fruit.
Boy chasing after two stars.
Especially with how much he transforms.
The very first thing they turned him into is a lion that runs so wild. But she held him fast,
But he can never hurt her because he is the father of her child.
for it's the father of her child.
I also like how sinister he portrays the Elf Queen.
Tamblins away, brave boys, brave Tamblins away.
Needless to say, I am disappointed Red did not cover this on OSP. Delete your channel and die. I bring these two up because normally extreme Christians don't like believing other religious folk tales and such, especially one so openly fantastical. On the more critical end, Imperial and Christ and the Pale Queens. Imperial is, generally speaking, an album about the nature of a Christian imperialism. I can't claim with complete certainty there isn't some angle of Christian supremacy, especially with how much the band writes about Jerusalem, but the album certainly has an angle of biblical prophecy, especially with the song Imperium 3, in some respects, is about imperialism and how it wipes away culture and identity in favor of non-compliance.
He gave me words and vows withal. He gave me a delicate gown to wear, all stitched with sorrow and hemmed with fear.
And then there's Forever Changing in Christ and the Pale Queens. In Christ and the Pale Queens, god damn it, which describes the Lord as a serpent or dragon which flaps over its creations in the little world.
With my wings I fly above this little world. I have kindled every spark of life. I emit nothing that is deadly. I decide on all reality.
In my interpretation, it seems to write either, or God, or whatever, created the world as a more sinister serpent which cares little for its subjects, or perhaps a facade of a lord which disguises as a serpent which feeds off of life, in the grand scheme of the universe. I'm mostly improvising this while editing out of some concerns I had, and you can ignore them if you want, but while I was editing, I kind of noticed a few things in the songs Forever Changing and Hypnagogue, where in Forever Changing, there was kind of a weird motif in the song about the creature, having certain monstrous features on the left side, and I think that had to do with left-handedness, but so I kind of suspect that this might be about liberals, but I can't tell. And in Hypnagogue, I was a little worried about what a hypnagogue was because it sounds like synagogue with hypnotize, which sounds like something Laura Boebert would send me on my answering machine. Though it's actually referred to as an agent that includes drowsiness or sleep. And there's the fact that in the lyrics there's still more critical parts of the album. For example, there's the part 9, the final part. Not only is there a line about for the last 2,000 years a vast empire of death and empire of blood after the crucifixion, it also has references in the song to Moses and about the ark and how they're leaving all these people behind, but the way they write about it makes it seem like Jesus has more contempt for those people, as if they don't matter because, oh, it's going to get better later, these people are not important. So I'm mostly adding this because I think it's something I want to address about that fluidity of the songs and how hard the message is, but also that I don't think they're explicitly meant to be either hateful or blindly praising of certain ideologies. I think these are meant to be very intentionally interpretive poetry about religion and allegiance. The poetry in the song is magnificent, and Forever Changing's portrayal of pain is beautiful. I don't think the band intended that, but I am me and I can't be stopped. There's also a lot of repetitive motifs, hence why I assumed a troubled person reflecting on a broken world. Fields of rape, children, women's names, Nazis, and Bethlehem. I do believe there is a sense of devout religion, but I don't think Current 93 is necessarily extreme in their religion, mostly because the music is a bit too outsider and inaccessible to be exclusively for devout evangelicals. And second, because the music is quite rough and harsh and even mean in a lot of places, which deep evangelical churches don't tend to do unless they're preaching against it. Also, the writing isn't particularly bright and shiny in the way the church would probably want it to be. You know, for the kids! I don't really think an album like The Light Is Leaving Us All is meant to be literal. It's poetry. There's also the singing style David Tibet, that's his maiden name, employs. For example, in 1,000 Witches, he kind of sings the way someone would sing a nursery rhyme or children's book.
Isabella, Bella Lua, Bella, Betty, and the Lord.
Speaking of children, All the Pretty Little Horses. This is an album that I believe, to a certain extent, an album about the narrator dealing with raising a child. Honestly, the song about all the pretty horses is absolutely devastating compared to the darker themes of the rest of the album. You have this long album about darkness and nihilism, paraphrasing, and at the end, right before the closer, you have a nice song about telling the innocent children to dream of pretty little horses, which is a repeat of its opener.
Don't you cry, go to sleepy little baby. When you wake, you shall have all the pretty little horses.
It did make me cry a little, I will admit. I have to go back to 1,000 Witches because it is honestly the greatest song Current 93 has ever made. The Light Is Leaving Us All feels like an album of defeat and worry, but mixed in with strangely beautiful compositions of vibrant strings over lyrics about witches and witch trials. In my interpretation, the women are being prosecuted over witch trials, and this song is about the unfairness of that. Yet it feels triumphant and oddly assuring, mostly because it laments over that concept, even if the song right after is dark and sinister again.
So now consider the generation of witches.
The darker albums in the No Wave Age, as short as it was, feel a bit confusing. Dog's Blood Rising, Nature Unveiled, and In Menstrual Night are quite brutal albums compared to almost everything afterwards. They also fit quite well with everything else the group has released, to be honest. While I do find Dog's Blood Rising to be fairly poorly paced even for only 5 songs, it was certainly interesting, because it sounds like Panic in the darkest possible way.
The mulberry bush, the mulberry bush, the mulberry bush.
I think it's mostly about rapture and such, but I focus on the track Falling Back in Fields of Rape. To really hammer down the shock value, they hired a child to scream it. I don't know why, to be honest, but I think it's a song about bastards, I suppose. There's a lot of children in these albums. Somehow they never fit. Nature Unveiled and In Menstrual Night are some of the best Current 93 albums in contrast. Nature Unveiled is a harsh no-wave album about violence and death, if my memory is being kind to me. In Menstrual Night is also a beautiful album about death. To my surprise, I thought I would prefer these albums more as opposed to the acoustic compositions, but I instead prefer those. However, I would be remiss to talk about Current 93 without mentioning their darkest albums. The two that are the most iconic are Faust and, of course, I Have a Special Plan for This World. If you've ever listened to Cyclopean's The King in Yellow, and yes, I did learn how to pronounce it, thank you, you have heard one of the most twisted and uncomfortable albums on the planet. However, Faust is a close second. The album reflects that sense of insanity, and listening to it, I could not have been happier when it was over. This album is fucking psychotic. It is hard to listen to. The long drones of voices and noise, the whispers of intense psychosis, and the general atmosphere of it. If you want hazy noise like Take Care, It's a Desert Out There, listen to Faust. It is brutal. Apparently this is an album dedicated to the person, and I'm not trying to wipe that away, though the liner notes do mention the literature of Count Magnus Stenbock. Michael even wishes him many beautiful cats. And with that comes I Eva, you know the goddamn title at this point. The famous and disturbing 2000 album of Thomas Ligotti's Palm. Ligotti was a poet that Current 93 worked with once. They made In a Foreign Town, in a Foreign Land next to his book. I don't know anything about Ligotti nor that album, but thankfully I didn't make this video about the album, so I can live with it. I Have a Special Plan for This World is an album about pure torment and realization. Long stanzas about death, pain, life, control, and choice. The opening sounds like a health ward with someone singing Delusions in the background before Tibet begins his dead narration, referring to this special plan either through a force which cannot be understood or through the narrator's own potential. The best way I can describe the album is this. This is an album if you took the most extreme thoughts out of pain and suffering and you applied it to philosophical thought experiments. And it's hell.
You can do nothing you are not told to do. There is no hope for escape from this dream that was never yours. The very words you speak are only its very words. And you talk like a traitor under its incessant torture.
There have been some that claim this album is similar to the thought patterns in certain cases of schizophrenia. I only put that here to say that I think that's an interpretation. I do believe this album is linked to psychosis and hallucinations, but more in the broken and mentally ill way, not in a drug or defamatory way. As I've said, after hearing more of Current 93's albums, the theme of pain and torment and suffering, along with the projection of that trauma, is very prevalent, to the point I could probably make a case that I Have a Special Plan for This World is a long mental breakdown dragged out as the person comes to terms with their torment.
They did not see far enough, and are held forever where there is no time.
Also, this album cover of Someone is absolutely breathtaking. This isn't the only Current 93 album in the style, but none of them trump over those goddamn eyes. Which brings me to the last set of albums, the modern form of Current 93. Honeysuckle Aeons, If a City is Set Upon a Hill, and A Life at Hallucinatory Mountain. Reading is easy. It's harder to describe these albums because they're mostly the same experimental collage albums, but also they're slightly different. Yeah, have you ever wanted to hear Current 93 with electric guitars and psychedelic rock? Because that's what A Life at Hallucinatory Mountain is, god damn it. Have you ever wanted to hear Current 93 with persistent drumming like a dark cave? Honeysuckle Aeons.
Hundreds of hells, singing like ovens.
Do you want to hear a concept album about a great city? At least that's what I thought on my first listen.
Under the grass and moss.
I didn't do more because I was busy being denied job interviews. I don't know what the album is about. Mostly of these albums, including The Light Is Leaving Us All, I find more abstract than their acoustic counterparts decades before. I find them much better listened to as music instead of experimental poetry. They certainly do require focus and multiple listens to understand, though they certainly show that progression in the band's trajectory, especially for more eerie, off-putting, and even emotional albums. I can't really explain to you why The Light Is Leaving Us All put me to tears, I really can't. It's just something within how it portrays its strange ideas morphed into emotional connection. These are my personal favorites, because, shut up. Remember when I said Current 93 were very obscure? They certainly aren't known. According to the band, The Light Is Leaving Us All was a million seller. I don't know if I believe that, Mr. 93. I'm not saying that the band can't sell albums with how much there are. Surely they do. More that, really, there are tons of albums about religion, empires, demons, children's atrocities, and people in these albums that I couldn't possibly mention, unless I wanted to, but that would take 6 months. I'm not a rabbit. However, especially after listening to their music and thinking about it through the month, I find it more impressive because of the amount of music I came out remembering and loving. The only albums that did little for me were the neo-folk albums, Soft Black Stars and Black Ships Ate the Sky. Almost everything else from the religious commentary in Hypnagogue, the beautiful compositions in How He Loved the Moon, the writing in Thunder Perfect Mind, and the strange darker tone of Honeysuckle Aeons, I still find myself wondering exactly what the songs were about, especially with the religious allusions and strange directions such as in 666. To how fucking confusing actually figuring out the order the albums came out in, which ones I did listen to, and which ones I already did, such as when I listened to Crooked Crosses for the Naughty Gods / Swastikas for Naughty, then Swastikas for Gaudy. Oops. Even through all of that, I do recommend listening to the albums, at least one, just for the sake of it. It's extremely interesting written poetry on top of ambient music, sometimes with gorgeous compositions, allusions to Tam Lin, Lewis Wayne, and even more. What more do you want? Speaking of Lewis Wayne, I want to show you this. I believe, if I remember right, he drew this when people came together to help him find a proper sanatorium that wasn't abusive when he was having a mental health crisis.